think we'll begin and let people come in. I know people are still having coffee and it's been a long day.
Have you been in government meetings today during the day?
Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. Can I encourage people to take a seat? And if there's anybody on the periphery of coming in, they might be encouraged to come in. I want to introduce the final plenary session of today. I know everybody here has had a long day. It's been, I think, a very productive day, a very robust, interactive day, and certainly for me personally, a hugely useful and informative day. This final plenary session, before we have a little look around the other part of Dublin Castle, which is a little grander than this part, where we have our reception across the courtyard at 6 o'clock. But before we do that, I want participants to hear from, in a way, the seasoned travellers of OGP, people who have been pathfinders, who have been involved, who have pushed the boat out and have encouraged countries like my own to be involved on this dynamic journey, probably the most important dynamic voyages of the 21st century. The panel will consist of three people representing different perspectives from the OGP, from an international point of view. And the first speaker that I want you to pay attention to is Frances Maude, Minister for the Cabinet Office and Paymaster General in the United Kingdom, known, I suppose, to many people here. Frances was appointed Minister for the Cabinet Office and Paymaster General in May of 2010. He's held several government posts, including Minister of State at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office from 89 to 90, and Financial Secretary to the Treasury from 90 to 92. A very experienced public representative and politician, but most of all, somebody very committed to the goals and objectives of OGP. Frances.
Brendan, thank you very much for that, and it's a great pleasure to be joining friends and colleagues here in Dublin. And thank you to you, Brendan, and your colleagues and your team for making this was clearly a spectacularly successful event. The three of us on this panel, if we appear slightly distray, it's because we're all slightly disorientated, because we've been having a big OGP week. We were in the steering committee meeting of the OGP in Indonesia earlier in the week, and then some of us attended the OGP Asia Pacific regional meeting. And there are people who've come, I had a brief day in London in the meantime, but there are some who've come straight from one to the other. And actually, as we come here, we all said, well, the weather in Dublin is going to be different from what it was in Indonesia, and this afternoon it's lovely. It could be, what could be better? So great to be sharing in today's event and celebrating our shared commitment to transparency and openness. Within Europe and elsewhere in the world, we're at different stages. All countries are at different stages on that journey. And it is a trajectory without a fixed endpoint, but a trajectory that leads to better government and stronger prosperity. Ireland's a relatively recent country to join the OGP, but has been moving really fast. In October, your government, Brendan, unveiled a range of open data commitments at the London conference. 6 months later, not only have you published the National Action Plan, but this meeting is taking place here in Dublin Castle. So I strongly congratulate you, Brendan, and your team for taking this opportunity and grasping the responsibilities that membership of the OGP brings. And the thing about being a reformer is that it's addictive. And there's an adrenaline that comes from doing things differently, from challenging the status quo, from insisting on things being done differently. And once you start, it's hard to stop. Transparency has now taken root firmly on both shores of the Irish Sea, and with last month's state visit to the UK by President Higgins still fresh in our minds, I think this is another area where our two countries, Ireland and the United Kingdom, can learn much from each other. And of course, that's why we're gathered here today. The role of the reformer in government can often be a lonely one and a tough one. We do things that aren't popular. We do things that challenge the vested interests. We come up against all the time resistors, those who want to resist change and protect the status quo. So it's important that reformers come together and support each other and learn from each other and give each other strength, because we need it. And it's particularly important that we support those countries that have undergone the biggest changes in the last few years. We need to set a positive example that openness is part of what it means to be a democratic, prosperous, and dynamic 21st century nation. Europe can be proud of what we're doing. Nearly 30 countries in the region now are members of OGP. In Paris, just 2 weeks ago, it was a pleasure for Brendan and myself to be there supporting our French colleague as the French government was welcomed into the fold of the OGP. We shouldn't kid ourselves, though, that Europe somehow has all the answers and nothing to learn. We all have things to learn. We need to work more closely together, both through the OGP and on a bilateral basis, because we can't really measure or improve our performance unless we know what good looks like, and we'll only know this by sharing our experience. Around the world, there are some amazing examples of openness in action. In Indonesia, earlier this week, I saw how the government has launched a tool that allows the public to submit complaints and inquiries about national development programs through a website or through their mobiles. There's much we can learn from our partners in all regions. Indeed, the economic crash and the subsequent recession has been a stop and take stock moment for governments across the whole of Europe. We face, actually governments all around the world face the similar challenges of squeezed budgets, budget deficits, the rising expectations of citizens for better public services, and low growth and flat economies. We're all searching for answers to the same question: how can we deliver more for less? In the UK, austerity in public finances is going to be a fact of life for some years to come. And when it comes to cutting costs and tackling budget deficits, there are two paths to take. There's the low road of salami slicing departmental budgets and programs to impose top-down savings which affect frontline services and cut the quality of what the citizen gets from government. Or there's the high road of redesigning public services from the bottom up and by cutting our own costs in government. And we owe it to the public to take that high road. It's the one that's most difficult because it means taking on our own vested interests, but it's the one the public deserve us to take. We decided in the UK that we needed to transform the way we did things, and we now, 4 years into the programme of reform, we can distill 5 principles for public service reform to help us meet those challenges. The first is tight control over common activities, things like property, IT, procurement, because this reduces costs and it encourages collaborative working. The second is looser control over operations, shifting power away from the centre and diversifying the range of public service providers. We strongly support staff-owned mutuals, joint ventures, social enterprises, which can raise productivity and cut costs. Third, we need a properly innovative culture, so public servants feel they have permission to try sensible new ideas without feeling that they're endangering their career by doing it. And that means listening to different and non-traditional voices when making policy, encouraging participation, active participation. And one of the great things about the OGP is it allows government, and in fact it requires government and civil society to sit around the same table and learn from one another. The fourth principle for us, digital by default. If a public service can be delivered online, it should be delivered online and only online. And that's cheaper. Online services will be faster, simpler, more convenient for the public to use, and the costs are dramatically lower. A 20th of the cost of the service being provided by phone, a 30th of it being done by mail, by post, a 50th of the cost of delivering it face to face. And actually, it can be incredibly important in eradicating petty corruption, because it removes the face to face, where often there can be low-level corruption involved in greasing the bureaucratic wheels. Digitalization can impose real equity and fairness and transparency. So, fourth principle, digital by default. And the fifth, which is the one we're really talking about here, is openness. And that underpins everything else. Transparency, publishing open data, makes government more accountable to citizens, it strengthens our democracy. Secondly, it informs choice over public services and thus enables people to exercise more control and choice in an informed way over public services. And the third is that it feeds economic and social growth. It's a raw material. Historically, governments have tended to hoard information. It was kept under lock and key in castles, often very much like this one. But now the networked, decentralized spirit of the internet age has started to permeate how we work, how we socialize, and how we think. Technology has revolutionized the relationship between citizen and state. It should both compel and empower governments to work in new ways. Almost 10 years ago now, the UK's first Freedom of Information Act came into force. It gave the public a statutory right to access information held by public authorities. It was a historic piece of legislation that's done much to empower the public, but in some ways it's the wrong way of doing things. Wrong because governments should be putting the information out proactively. We shouldn't be waiting for people to ask. Getting information out to the government shouldn't be like pulling teeth. If it's appropriate for it to be published in response to a request, it should be put out there proactively in the first place. My aim is to make freedom of information, access to information laws completely redundant, because anything which is appropriate to be released should already have been released. People should be able to see the inner workings of their governments. Taxpayers have a right to see where and how their money is spent. Public data belongs to the citizen, not to the state. Now, in Britain, when the coalition government came into power in 2010, we pledged to be the most transparent government ever. We wanted to move from a culture where data's hoarded to being open by default. Everything must be presumed open and accessible unless there's a really strong reason for it not to be. So we flicked the openness switch from pull to push. And in August last year, the 10,000th data set was released on data.gov.uk, our open data portal. It's already the largest of its kind in the world, and it's growing all the time, but it's competitive, and so it should be. Governments are properly competing to be the most open, and that's the best kind of race to the top that we could want. But data.gov.uk isn't a monument to big data or big government. It's a working resource for civil society and for business. We've designed it to be useful because we know that as well as making government more accountable, publishing non-personalised, de-identified government data can both improve public services and it can fuel economic growth. So our Open Data Institute, an independent institute, is incubating new startup companies that use this data as a raw material. And there's a thriving tech community just waiting for the opportunity. Of course, it's easy for governments to be open about things that don't really matter. What really counts is being open about the things that do matter and releasing the information that people want so that they can cultivate new enterprises and create new jobs. Through our open data user group, individuals and businesses can request data to be released openly. And government departments now have dedicated transparency sector boards of their own which constantly challenge them to provide more data. The recent severe flooding in the UK demonstrated for us the power of open data to improve services and drive growth. We brought together more than 200 software developers and computer programmers to find ways of using open data to help people affected. When this hackathon took place, it was about using open data as a fuel. We released data which until then had only been available at a cost to a small number of commercial companies. And this included readings updated every 15 minutes from every flood sensor in the UK, effectively giving hackers live data on the situation across the country. Teams of volunteers discussed, developed, refined, wrote and tested applications on that day, applications and services to use that data. They came up with impressive ideas, including a service that connects people with their energy supplier in the event of a power cut, an app that alerts Twitter users to volunteering opportunities in their local areas. Now, when I started out in politics, a hack was someone who caused problems for politicians. Now it's something that brings solutions. And that's the power of open data. It's a high-octane fuel. It powers innovation in government. It propels new ideas from the computer screen to the marketplace. W.H. Auden once wrote that history marches to the beat of a clear idea, and nothing's clearer than transparency. More accountable government, better public services, stronger economic growth, the benefits of open data are immense. The Open Government Partnership, which I'm proud to have been part of from its inception, is changing how countries are viewing and doing openness. All of us, all countries which have joined and committed to join, have made a meaningful commitment, backed by a tough and practical series of actions. It isn't enough just to sign up. Governments have to do things, and sometimes uncomfortable things. This is out of the comfort zone. Transparency is increasingly seen as a tangible, measurable force with a direct impact on people's lives. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Victor Hugo said it first, says, "Nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come." And yes, transparency is an idea whose time has come. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you for all your hard work and for your inspiring words today. Our next and second speaker is Veronica Cretu, President of the Open Government Institute and OGP Steering Committee member. Veronica is an active member of several important national and international committees relating to open government and internet governance. Since April of 2013, Veronica is a member of the Civil Society Steering Committee of the Open Government Partnership and is a coordinator of the Civil Society Working Group on e-government, open government, part of the Moldova National Participation Council. So to give us a civil society perspective, I invite Veronica to speak to us.
Your Excellencies, civil society leaders, dear colleagues and friends, dear participants, it is indeed a great pleasure to be here this afternoon and share with you some thoughts and some reflections related to the perspectives on the OGP globally. Before I do that, let me congratulate the Government of Ireland and colleagues from civil society in Ireland who put a wonderful event yesterday afternoon, and I think they deserve a hand of applause for that matter. It is also important to share with you that those of us in OGP who have participated in the Asia-Pacific event on open government a couple of days ago, as have been mentioned, we have witnessed a great deal of passion and energy in that part of the world as well around open government. So Open Government Partnership is gaining the momentum with these European and Asian events, as evidenced by the continuously growing engagement from civil society organizations both in OGP member countries and non-OGP member countries. OGP is seen today by many civil society representatives in different parts around the world as a great hope and a wonderful opportunity for bringing more transparency, accountability, citizen participation in policy development in their respective countries, as well as in creating more civic space for civil society to engage on equal footing with the governments around the above-mentioned issues. To keep these dynamics growing, there are a number of aspects we have to continue working together in OGP, and I will just mention a number of them. Number one, deepening and broadening the engagement of the civil society in the open government agenda. OGP can work if civil society is an active part of it. Civil society is the icon, if you want, of the global trend of democratization. And if democracy, as it is known in the West, has a home, then it is with the civil society. In designing national action plans on open government, governments have to accept to deepen and broaden that space, accept to co-create, co-design together with civil society those national action plans. And given that open government is a transformative idea, governments need to accept to transform and rethink their relationship with civil society. Top-down consultations around national action plans is not about open government at all, rather an illustration of the government's inability to get out of their comfort zone and embed new working principles in their relationship with the civil society. The examples of the consultation models or different methodologies around national action plans in countries such as UK, Georgia, Croatia, and others are really inspiring and worth promoting. One of the strongest elements of the OGP action plans is that it introduces a regular cycle of policy planning, implementation and monitoring, and each stage of this cycle presents an opportunity and an obligation for governments to engage with civil society to seek their input and feedback. This is still a very uncomfortable exercise for many public representatives. I remember when I was conducting a capacity building orientation session with one of the ministries in Moldova back in August last year around the second action plan on open government, there were several chiefs of the departments who shared concerns related to the fact that bottom-up approaches and consultations with civil society will take much of their time, and they are not going to manage to do their own job properly, demonstrating once again that the overall resistance towards change is still influencing the quality of the policy development, not only around the open government action plans, but across all the sectors. Is this type of attitude going to help us achieve a more open and inclusive government? I doubt so. It is only through participation, clear commitment, mutual trust and respect, collegiality and accountability, and long-term vision that both governments and civil society will manage to succeed. In working together to develop OGP commitments, both governments and civil society must take risks and must make compromises. Civil servants should be ready to open up the doors of the government and recognize that there are good ideas out there and it's worth listening to them, it's worth considering them. Civil society, on the other hand, should accept that shifting bureaucracies is not easy, and collaborating with government requires, indeed, much pragmatism, openness, and flexibility. Another aspect I wanted to tackle relates to the civic space. While open government as a concept, as a philosophy, promotes openness and inclusiveness and participation, we have been witnessing an unprecedented closing of the civic space, particularly in some of the OGP member countries in Europe. Is intimidation of civil society activists going to make the governments more open and citizen-friendly? Or reducing access to public sector information, banning access to online social media going to make us, the citizens, want to get closer to our governments? I doubt so. The fostering of civil society is a crucial step towards realizing a freer Europe, given today's geopolitical agenda and severe violations of basic human rights in the region, especially driven by Russia's politics. The existence of the civil society implies a shared sense of identity, and what is crucial for us in OGP is to uphold the values and principles of OGP as articulated in the Open Government Declaration and OGP Articles of Governance. Another important aspect to look at in OGP is the potential of the independent reporting mechanism, which I want to touch upon. OGP is not a free ride. The theory of change of OGP states clearly that the more government learn from the findings of the IRM, the more likely it is that each action plan will demonstrate noticeable improvements in both process and content. As norms shift and governments become more comfortable with transparency, governments will begin introducing more new opportunities for dialogue and become more receptive to civil society input and participation. And finally, the more citizens see the government tackling meaningful reforms through OGP, the more they will want to engage and will pressure the elected leaders to deliver. So we should all make better use of the IRM reports and raise awareness of both what has been indeed improved as well as what still needs to be improved. All the above are important elements of OGP, and each and every one of us has a role to play and promote further on this agenda. How can we do that? There are at least 3 good ways from my perspective, and I will start from education. I think that open government principles and values have to be embedded in the educational system at all levels. It is through the educational system that we can educate open government promoters, build skills such as critical thinking, innovative thinking, open thinking, that are essential to help future citizens become ready for an open government, be ready to co-create and co-design policies, initiatives, challenge and utilize data, evidence for a better informed decision-making. If we start designing open and participatory learner-centered schools in which everyone has a word to say both on the process and on the content, we are much more likely to start building an open government in our countries. Research also shows that the decisions made at the school level based on the educational data change completely the quality of the decisions made as well as the quality of the educational outcomes. So open government also starts from open-minded educational policymakers, open schools, open teachers, open students. Another way to do that is through participation. OGP needs to bring more countries and activists to join in. Bringing more countries is essential to gain the momentum, to create more regional synergies, particularly there where civic space has been limited through different means, to bridge the divide between those benefiting from open government and those who don't, support and encourage participation of open government reformers, and continue encouraging participation for meaningful reforms leading to improvement of quality of life of the citizens around the world. And one last aspect is innovation. Continue innovating at all levels. There is no doubt that technology has changed the way both citizens and governments interact with each other, and its potential is indeed enormous. However, it is important that in OGP, commitments are not being anchored only in the technological type of innovations. Innovating the relationships between the government and the citizens is crucial indeed. We have to be aware that several billions of the world's population is still without access to internet. Does it mean they can't enjoy the benefits of an open government? In OGP, we should also be looking at ways to go beyond the technology and address those who don't have access to it in order to be able to participate in an open government agenda. And another venue for innovation in OGP is through embedding OGP principles in sector-specific action plans, strategic documents, initiatives on, be it education, healthcare, and other sectors that might generate more innovations in those areas and might make the sectors more competitive. And if Mr. Maude's famous quote says that transparency is an idea whose time has come, it inspires me to affirm that indeed education, participation, and innovation are priorities whose time has come in OGP. Thank you all very much, and wishing you all an interesting day tomorrow, wonderful evening today, and much success in all the wonderful work that you do in your respective countries, be it as civil society leaders or as government representatives. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Veronica, for your insightful commentary. Our third speaker is Mr. Paul Chaffey, State Secretary to the Minister of Local Government and Modernisation in Norway. Paul was appointed State Secretary in October 2013, has served as a member of the Parliament in Norway from 1989 to 1997, was a member of the Standing Committee on Foreign and Constitutional Affairs, as well as the Secretary of the Standing Committee on Energy and Environment. To give his perspective now, I invite Paul to speak to us.
Thank you very much, Brendan, and thank you for inviting me to reflect a little bit on the relevance and importance of the OGP in Europe. And as you said, I came into government, so the government system now in October. So I'm a recent arrival. Norway as a country has been in the OGP from the beginning and member of the Standing Committee. But my perspective is getting into this kind of part of the world quite recently. The London summit was my first meeting, and then the steering committee now. And seeing both here and in Indonesia, that of course the challenges aren't quite the same in all countries and all over the world. There are a lot of different sort of baselines to work out from, and we've heard a lot about that here. And I'm a representative from the kind of cold corner in the north of Europe where one might be tempted to think that we've already understood this openness thing. We've got it and we are doing it. It's not about us, it's about the others. So if we are to be active in this, it should be a kind of development support thing that the Foreign Office people and others could help with. And I just to say that immediately, that's not our perspective. We certainly are interested in discussing with others and supporting ambitions in other countries, but this is about us as well. We strongly believe that open government and reform of government is important in our own domestic agenda. In every government, and we have quite a lot of governments in our part of the world, and that's also a reason why we always have to think through whether we're doing things in the right way, whether the big sort of major aims there that we have are being achieved, or whether we forget that in all the sort of daily work we are doing. I think Francis had a very, very good way of describing the tension between the reformers and the resistors. I think that's a very, very good perspective to have in all our countries. The people who are here are the reformers, mainly, I think, anyway. That's the aim of the OGP, to create an arena where we can meet, and knowing that change always has its opponents. We need to learn from each other, we need to exchange experiences, we need to inspire each other, and we need to help each other in our agenda, and it's a domestic agenda also. So we are committed at home to open data. We're committed to more innovative civil servants. I think that's the sort of creating the room to take risk and do things differently is important. We are committed to clear language, someone talked about earlier today, to write legislation in a language people understand. That's quite radical, but we believe that it's possible, and if it's possible, we should do it. We have, because we have some experience from this, we've also, in fact, submitted 2 action plans to the OGP, and that was a learning process too. So those of you who are in the process of delivering the first one, we can tell you that we didn't all get it right the first time either. We didn't answer the right questions from the Norwegian side. We had a very good feedback process. We had a hearing in London from the evaluators, and we learned a lot from that, so I believe anyway, but we'll see when it is evaluated how the second action plan comes out. But it's more concrete, and for example, it includes a point on our domestic agenda, where we have committed ourselves to implement in this parliamentary term a local government reform. We want to reduce the number of municipalities, strengthen local democracy, and move tasks from the central level to the local level. We are concerned that that should be a process that is both the process and the end result should be open and transparent and create more democracy. So we've submitted that as one of our items in the action plan and want to be evaluated on that. One sort of paradox in the open government partnership is that democracy might sometimes be a problem because we have change of governments, and when governments change, they don't really know how to, whether this is important or not. That was our situation when we changed government in October. What is this OGP thing? And we see some places that governments new governments don't quite get it, so the country loses some interest. And I think it's important to follow up that and to sort of anchor the OGP even more broadly, so that it's something that a new government with maybe a different agenda in some areas don't leave the OGP, but feel that they perhaps should increase the commitments to the OGP. But we have to explain what sort of the relevance and importance is. And for me, when I talk about this, there are three things for us, and I think they're relevant to others too. One is what Francis talked about, the networks of reformers. The people who have the job to open up, to change, to highlight things that are wrong, often have a lonely job. They might be auditors, they might be anti-corruption officers, they might be procurement people, they might be ombudsmen. Some of them have meeting places today, probably, but it's important to help and support and to develop those meeting places. And I also think we need meeting places for the politicians in charge of these processes, because that can sometimes be a lonely job too. Secondly, I think it's a good idea not only for civil society, but also for achieving results in government, to open up and let anybody track the commitments, the ambitions, and the results. The open data thing isn't only about sharing everything, it is about measuring whether we achieve what we said we were going to achieve, and that's important for politicians and governments as well. Thirdly, I think that good ideas and innovation come from lots more places than they did previously. Some of that has to do with technology. It has to do with the sort of price of both hardware and software going down, so a lot more things are possible to do than previously. The sort of app economy, the cloud, the open data makes it easier, and that means that in our countries, in the cold north, where we believe we've understood a lot of things already, can learn a lot from cheap initiatives that use technology, use information in new ways, and that can be copied. And copying, I think, is a good idea in this sense. And to support that, and now just finally some words on behalf of the steering committee, we have, as the OGP, we want to support sharing of that kind of idea. So we've established something called the Open Government Awards that all countries can and should, in my opinion, take part in. Each party member of the OGP is challenged through those awards to submit one application a year describing a public program or initiative that represents their most ambitious or effective effort to improve government transparency, accountability and responsiveness to citizens. The theme of the 2014 awards is citizens' engagement. And there will, in the tradition of the OGP, of course, be scoring and panel, and so that there is transparency around the process. This was launched at the Open Government, the awards were launched at the summit in London. The call has gone out in April, and the winners will be announced at a high-level Open Government Partnership event that will be in New York in September, where we expect some very high-level people to attend. That will also give these, not only the winner, but probably a lot of good and innovative ideas the attention we feel they deserve. So I would ask you to read the OGP web pages and read more about how you file your candidates for the Open Governments Award 2014. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Paul. I feel encouraged and sustained by Paul's commentary, and I think we should establish a trade union for reform ministers. It might be a new initiative. I don't know how that would go down with the Tory party, Francis. We have a few minutes before we bring this opening day, I think a very successful day, to a conclusion. And I thank all of you for the openness of your minds during the various debates today. But we have room for a few questions if anybody has a compulsion now to ask some final questions. And if you, we'll get a microphone to you, and if you could identify yourself. It's on its way there. If you just put your hand up so they can see you.
Thanks. Paul Braithwaite from the Building Change Trust in Northern Ireland. I'm interested in the potential for the Open Government Partnership to, I suppose, take the next step in its evolution towards implementation at sub-national level. I'm here with a group of civil society representatives from Northern Ireland, and I suppose our particular concern in relation to the UK action plan is that because of the nature of devolution in the UK, the commitments for the most part only apply in England and to some extent Wales. So I'd be interested in hearing from Minister Maude in particular around whether there is an intent in the UK to, in the next round of action planning, to kind of involve the devolved administrations, and also from the panel in general about internationally whether this is a pattern, particularly in federal states or other states with high levels of devolution, whether that might be necessary in order to make it really real for citizens at a grassroots level.
Thank you. Francis?
No, it's a really good question, and I don't think I've got a great answer to it. Because actually, I mean, the level at which open government has taken root most really is probably in cities, where there's quite a strong sort of smart city, open city movement, which we spent a bit of time highlighting at the London summit in the autumn. I mean, in our own context, with 3 devolved administrations, we tend to be a bit kind of hands-off and not wanting to intervene. I mean, one of the distinguishing features of the Open Government Partnership and the transparency movement is that it's ideologically neutral. I mean, there are governments of the left, the right, the centre, every kind of orientation you can think of, for whom this is a crucial tool, and what differentiates supporters and opponents of transparency is whether you want reform, but it's a really good question. I will be encouraged to raise this with colleagues in the devolved administrations.
Any of the other colleagues like to add? Yes, Paul?
Yeah, I think conceptually it's a good idea, because a lot of the services people get from the public sector are delivered by local government. I mean, in the public transport, education, care for the elderly, and the countries differ slightly, but I mean, typically you would, the services a lot of people care most about are at that level. The strategic problem, I think, in the discussion we're having is a kind of deepening or broadening discussion in the OGP. Should we become better at the things we're already doing and not try too much at the same time, or should one broaden and move into new areas? And I mean, this is an organization with quite a small budget, people, very dedicated people, but not with a lot of resources. So one has to be a bit careful, I think, like governments also do, to broaden too much. So I think that's an interesting discussion to sort of follow up, and I think we were touched it in Bali, but we certainly didn't conclude.
Veronica, did you want to add something?
I think there is a potential to that, and I think as we evolve as a partnership, and we will slowly move from the national action plans based on central government generated commitments. I think we are slowly going to get to the subnational or to the local levels indeed. So this is, from my perspective, this will be the natural evolution of the next steps in OGP.
Another question? Anybody else? Are we brain weary? I don't see another hand, so we'll bring this session to a conclusion. Again, thank you all for your participation. We're going to walk across the courtyard to the State Apartments, where there's a reception, and I think people can have a look around. From Francis will be very interested. He hasn't been in Dublin Castle before. It was the seat of British administration in Ireland for 700 years. Until we made it more open. So enjoy the rest of the evening.